The hammer struck true against wood, and Elias Thornton felt the vibration travel up his arm like thunder as he stood 60 feet in the air, building what everyone in 3 counties would soon call impossible. The summer of 1872 in Montana Territory had arrived with a vengeance, bringing heat that shimmered across the valley floor and turned the distant mountains into wavering mirages. Elias had spent the better part of 8 months cutting timber from his own land, hauling it down from the high country with his team of oxen, and now he was raising the frame of a barn that would dwarf every structure for 50 miles in any direction. His shoulders, broad as an ox yoke and corded with muscle earned from years in the wilderness, strained against his sweat-soaked shirt as he lifted another beam into place. His dark hair, grown long past his collar, was tied back with a strip of leather to keep it from his eyes. "You are going to break your fool neck," called up Samuel Garrett, the nearest neighbor, who stood on the ground with his hands on his hips. "That is if the whole thing does not come down first?" Elias grinned, his teeth white against his sun-darkened face. "Then I will have built the tallest pile of kindling in 3 counties instead." He was not worried. Every joint was sound, every measurement precise. The barn would stand 70 feet tall at its peak, with space enough for 100 head of cattle, storage for a year's worth of hay, and living quarters built into the upper level. Some men might have called it pride that drove him to build so high. Elias called it preparation. He had come to Montana 5 years ago with nothing but a rifle, an axe, and the clothes on his back. He had trapped beaver in streams so cold they made his bones ache, hunted elk in snow up to his waist, and carved a homestead from land that had never known a plow. Now, at 28 years old, he owned 640 acres of prime valley land, and he intended to build something that would last. The sun was starting its descent toward the western peaks when Elias climbed down, his muscles burning with fatigue. Samuel had already left, shaking his head at what he clearly considered folly. Elias did not mind. He had spent most of his adult life alone, and solitude suited him. He washed at the pump, the cold water shocking against his heated skin, and was walking toward his cabin when he heard the sound of a wagon coming up the road. Visitors were rare this far from town. Elias turned, shading his eyes against the lowering sun, and watched as a small wagon pulled by a single horse appeared around the bend. The driver wore a bonnet and a dark traveling dress, and even from a distance, Elias could see that she was handling the reins with skill. He felt a flicker of curiosity as the wagon drew closer and finally stopped near his well. "Good evening," the woman called out. Her voice was steady, but Elias could hear the weariness underneath. "I apologize for the intrusion. My horse needs water, and I'm afraid I have lost my way." Elias walked closer, and as he did, he got his first clear look at her face. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with dark eyes that met his directly and brown hair that had escaped her bonnet in soft curls around her face. Dust covered her dress and streaked her cheeks, but there was something about the set of her shoulders that spoke of determination rather than defeat. "You are not intruding," Elias said. "Water your horse. Where are you trying to get to?" "Silver Creek," she said, climbing down from the wagon with a grace that surprised him. Most women he had known would have waited for assistance. "I was told it was a day's ride north from Helena, but I fear my directions were poor." "Your directions were fine. You are headed the right way. Silver Creek is another 15 miles north, but you will not make it before dark." Elias gestured toward the road ahead. "The trail gets rough once you pass my land, and there's a creek crossing that is tricky even in daylight." The woman's expression tightened slightly, but she nodded. "Then I will camp somewhere along the way." "You will not," Elias said flatly. The words came out more forceful than he intended, and he saw her eyes flash with something between indignation and alarm. He softened his tone. "I apologize. What I mean is that it is not safe. We have had bear trouble lately, and a mountain lion took one of Samuel Garrett's calves last week. You can stay in my cabin tonight. I will sleep in the barn." She studied him for a long moment, and Elias found himself conscious of how he must look, a large, rough man with calloused hands and clothes that smelled of sweat and sawdust. He kept his expression neutral and waited. "That's very kind of you," she said finally. "My name is Clara Whitmore." "Elias Thornton." He held out his hand, and after a brief hesitation, she took it. Her palm was smaller than his, but her grip was firm. "Let me help you with your horse." As he unhitched the animal and led it to the water trough, Clara looked around the homestead. Her gaze lingered on the massive frame of the barn, and he saw her eyes widen slightly. "That is quite a structure," she said. "It will be when it is finished." Elias ran a hand over the horse's neck, checking for heat or injury. The animal was tired but sound. "What brings you to Silver Creek, if you do not mind my asking?" "A teaching position," Clara said. "The town posted a notice in Helena saying they needed a school teacher. I applied and they accepted." Elias glanced at her with new interest. "You came all this way alone for a teaching job?" "I did." There was a note of defensiveness in her voice now. "Is that so unusual?" "It is brave," Elias said simply. "Silver Creek is rough country. Are you from Montana?" "Illinois originally. I came to Helena last year with my aunt and uncle." Clara paused, and something shifted in her expression. "My aunt passed away this spring. My uncle remarried quickly, and his new wife had very specific ideas about how the household should be run. It seemed best for everyone if I found a position elsewhere." The words were carefully neutral, but Elias heard the hurt beneath them. He had spent enough time reading tracks and signs in the wilderness to recognize when something was being left unsaid. "I am sorry about your aunt." "Thank you." Clara turned away slightly, looking out across the valley. "This is beautiful land." "It is," Elias agreed. He led the horse to the small corral next to his cabin and stripped off the harness with practiced efficiency. "Come inside. You must be hungry." Clara hesitated, and Elias realized she was still uncertain about him. He could hardly blame her. She had stumbled onto the property of a stranger in the middle of nowhere, and every instinct she had was probably warning her to be cautious. "I promise you are safe here," he said quietly, meeting her eyes. "I give you my word." Something in his voice or expression must have convinced her, because she nodded and picked up a small bag from the wagon. Elias led the way to the cabin, suddenly conscious of how sparse and rough it must seem. He had built it himself 3 years ago, with function in mind rather than comfort. There was one large room with a stone fireplace, a table and 2 chairs he had made from lodgepole pine, a rope bed in one corner, and shelves that held his supplies. It was clean and well organized, but it was still the home of a man who spent most of his time outdoors. "Sit," Elias said, gesturing to the table. "I will make coffee." He moved around the cabin with efficient movements, building up the fire and setting a pot of coffee on to boil. He had venison left from his last hunt, and he sliced it thin and set it to fry in a pan with some of the potatoes he had stored in the root cellar. Clara watched him work, and he was aware of her gaze following his movements. "You live here alone?" she asked. "I do. Have for 5 years now." "Do you not find it lonely?" Elias considered the question as he turned the meat in the pan. "Sometimes, but I prefer my own company to bad company, and good company is rare." "That's a rather cynical view." "Maybe, or maybe just realistic." He glanced at her over his shoulder. "I have found that most people are out for themselves. Nothing wrong with that, but it makes for shallow relationships." "And you prefer depth," Clara said. It was not quite a question. "I prefer honesty," Elias corrected. He divided the food onto 2 tin plates and brought them to the table, then poured coffee into 2 cups. "I apologize for the rough fare." "It looks wonderful," Clara said, and he could hear the sincerity in her voice. "I have been eating cold biscuits and jerky for 2 days." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Elias found himself studying her when he thought she was not looking. There was something compelling about Clara Whitmore, something beyond her obvious beauty. She had an air of self-sufficiency that he recognized because he saw it in himself. She was not here because she had no other options. She was here because she had chosen this path. "Why a barn that tall?" Clara asked suddenly, nodding toward the window where the frame was visible against the darkening sky. Elias followed her gaze. "Because I can build it, and because it needs to be done right. I am going to expand my herd over the next few years. I need the space and I need the storage. But more than that," he paused, searching for the words, "I want to build something that lasts, something that says I was here and I made something worth making." Clara smiled, and it transformed her face. "I think I understand that." "Do you?" "Yes. Why else would someone travel hundreds of miles to teach children in a town they have never seen?" We all want to matter, do we not? Elias felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that startled him with its intensity. He had spent 5 years in these mountains, and in all that time, he could not remember anyone understanding him so quickly or so completely. They talked as the evening deepened into night, conversation flowing with an ease that surprised them both. Clara told him about growing up in Illinois, about her love of books and learning, about the frustration of living in a world that expected women to marry and have children and nothing more. Elias told her about leaving Ohio after his parents died, about learning to trap and hunt, about the savage beauty of Montana winters and the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. Finally, when Clara's eyes were growing heavy and she had stifled her third yawn, Elias stood. "You take the bed. I will get my bedroll and sleep in the barn." "I cannot turn you out of your own home," Clara protested. "You are not. I offered." Elias gathered his bedroll and a blanket from the chest by the bed. "The door has a bar. Use it. I will be working on the barn at first light, so do not be alarmed if you hear hammering." "Thank you, Elias," Clara said softly. "Truly. Your kindness means more than you know." He nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes, and stepped out into the night. The air had cooled, and the stars overhead were brilliant in the clear mountain sky. Elias walked to the barn, his mind full of thoughts he could not quite organize. He spread his bedroll in the hay he had stored in one corner and lay down, but sleep was a long time coming. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Elias was up before the sun, working on the barn frame as the sky shifted from black to gray to gold. He was aware of Clara emerging from the cabin, aware of her watching him work, but he forced himself to concentrate on the task at hand. He had a schedule to keep if he wanted the barn finished before winter. Around mid-morning, he climbed down to get water and found that Clara had made breakfast. There were biscuits on the table, fresh and hot, and more coffee brewing. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I wanted to. Consider it payment for your hospitality." Clara gestured to the table. "Sit, eat. You must be hungry after working all morning." The biscuits were excellent, light and flaky, and Elias ate 3 of them before he realized how hungry he had been. Clara sat across from him, drinking coffee and watching him with an expression of quiet amusement. "What?" he asked finally. "Nothing. It is just nice to cook for someone who appreciates it." "I appreciate it," Elias assured her. "I am a passable cook, but baking is beyond me. These are very good." Clara smiled. "Thank you. My aunt taught me. She was an excellent baker." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Clara said, "I should go. I want to reach Silver Creek by nightfall." Elias felt an unexpected surge of disappointment. "Let me saddle your horse." He helped her hitch up the wagon, checking the traces and the wheels with careful attention. Everything was sound. As Clara climbed up to the driver's seat, she looked down at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Thank you again, Elias. I hope we meet again sometime." "You will pass this way when you come back to Helena," Elias heard himself say. "Stop if you like. You are always welcome." "I will," Clara promised. She picked up the reins and then hesitated. "Good luck with your barn." "Good luck with your students." He watched the wagon roll away down the road, watched until it disappeared around the bend, and then stood there for several minutes more, staring at the empty space where it had been. Finally, he shook himself and turned back to the barn. He had work to do. The summer passed in a blur of activity. Elias worked from dawn until dark, raising the walls of the barn board by board. Samuel Garrett came by occasionally to help, and a few other neighbors pitched in for the heavy work of raising the roof beams. But mostly, Elias worked alone, driven by a vision that had become clearer in his mind with each passing day. The barn would not just be the tallest in 3 counties, it would be the finest. He thought about Clara more often than he cared to admit. She had been in his home for less than a day, but the memory of her presence lingered like a melody he could not quite forget. He found himself wondering if she had reached Silver Creek safely, if she liked the town, if her students were treating her well. Once, in a moment of weakness, he almost rode north to check on her. But that was foolishness. She was a schoolteacher starting a new life, and he was a mountain man with dirt under his nails and plans that did not include anyone else. August arrived with thunderstorms that rolled across the mountains almost every afternoon. Elias worked around the weather, using the rainy days to mill lumber and the clear mornings to continue construction. The barn was taking shape now, its massive frame dominating the valley. People from as far away as Helena started riding out just to see it, shaking their heads in wonder at the sheer audacity of the thing. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late August when Elias heard the wagon coming up the road again. He was on the roof, nailing down shingles, and he looked up to see a familiar horse and wagon approaching. His heart kicked against his ribs, and he had to force himself to finish securing the board he was working on before he climbed down. Clara pulled the wagon to a stop near the well and waved. She looked different somehow, more settled, more confident. The weariness that had shadowed her face in June was gone, replaced by something that might have been happiness. "Hello, Elias," she called. "I hope I am not interrupting." "You are not." He walked toward her, aware that he was covered in sawdust and probably smelled like a horse. "What brings you this way?" "I had business in Helena, and I thought I would stop and see how the barn was coming along." Clara climbed down from the wagon and walked toward the structure, tilting her head back to take in the full height of it. "My goodness, it is enormous." "It is getting there." Elias could not quite keep the pride out of his voice. "Another month and it will be finished." "May I see inside?" He led her through the wide opening where the main doors would eventually hang. The interior was cavernous, with sunlight streaming through the gaps in the roof that were not yet shingled. The upper level was framed out, creating a second story that would serve as both storage and living space. "This is incredible," Clara said softly, turning in a slow circle. "You built all of this yourself?" "Mostly. I had help with some of the heavy timber, but yes, mostly it was just me. I've never seen anything like it." She walked to one of the massive support posts and laid her hand against it. "It must have taken enormous strength." Elias shrugged, uncomfortable with the admiration in her voice. "It took time and planning. The strength is just part of it." They walked back outside, and Elias drew water from the well for both of them. They sat on the bench he had built near the cabin door, drinking in companionable silence while the afternoon sun slanted across the valley. "How is Silver Creek?" Elias asked finally. "Good. Better than I expected, actually." Clara's face lit up as she talked. "The children are wonderful, most of them, eager to learn, and the town has been welcoming. I have a small cabin near the schoolhouse, and the ladies of the town have been very kind." "I'm glad." And he was, even though a small, selfish part of him had hoped she might be unhappy enough to leave. "Are you staying in Helena tonight?" "No, I need to get back. I just wanted to see you. To see the barn, I mean." Clara colored slightly, and Elias felt his pulse quicken. "I have thought about you, about that night. It was one of the kindest things anyone has ever done for me." "It was nothing." "It was not nothing," Clara said firmly. "You took in a stranger when you had no reason to trust me. You treated me with respect and kindness. That matters." Elias did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Clara stood. "I should go, but I wanted to ask you something." She hesitated, looking uncertain for the first time. "Would you come to Silver Creek sometime, for a visit?" "I do not get to town much," Elias said slowly. "I know, but maybe you could make an exception." Clara met his eyes. "I would like to see you again, Elias, as more than just a passing acquaintance." The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Elias felt something inside him break open, something he had kept carefully guarded for longer than he cared to remember. "I would like that," he said quietly. "Very much." Clara's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good. Come next Sunday if you can. I will make you dinner." "I will be there." She left shortly after, but this time Elias did not feel the same sense of loss as he watched the wagon disappear. This time, he knew he would see her again. The following Sunday, Elias rode into Silver Creek in the early afternoon. He had bathed in the creek, trimmed his beard, and put on his cleanest shirt and trousers. He felt ridiculous, like a boy going courting for the first time, but he could not seem to stop himself from caring how he looked. Silver Creek was a small town, not much more than a wide spot in the road with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of houses. The schoolhouse sat at the north end of the main street, a neat white building with a bell tower. Behind it was a smaller cabin, and Clara was sitting on the porch when he rode up. She stood when she saw him, and Elias felt his breath catch. She was wearing a blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was pinned up in a way that made her look both elegant and approachable. "You came," she said, and he could hear the pleasure in her voice. "I said I would," she smiled. "Come in, dinner is almost ready." The cabin was small but comfortable, furnished with simple pieces that Clara had clearly tried to make homey. There were curtains at the windows, a quilt on the bed, and books stacked on every available surface. The smell of roasting chicken filled the air, and Elias realized he was ravenously hungry. They ate at the small table by the window, and the conversation flowed as easily as it had that first night. Clara told him about her students, about the challenges of teaching children who ranged in age from 6 to 15 in the same room, about the satisfaction of watching them learn. Elias told her about the progress on the barn, about his plans for expanding his herd, about the mountain lion he had tracked and killed after it started prowling too close to the homestead. After dinner, they walked through the town and up into the hills beyond. The late summer evening was perfect, warm but not hot, with a breeze that carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation ranging from books to politics to the best way to make sourdough bread. "I have never met anyone like you," Clara said as they stood on a hilltop overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "You are not like other men." "I do not know if that is a compliment or an insult," Elias said, but he was smiling. "It is definitely a compliment." Clara turned to face him, and in the fading light, her eyes were dark and serious. "Most men I have met want to tell me what to do, what to think, how to behave. You have never done that. You treat me like an equal." "Because you are an equal," Elias said simply. "Why would I treat you any other way?" Clara reached out and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. "This is why." Elias looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. He had been alone for so long, had convinced himself that he preferred solitude. But standing here with Clara, watching the sunset paint the sky, he realized how hungry he had been for connection. For her. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "I hope you will," Clara said softly. "I hope you will see me many times." Over the following weeks, Elias made the ride to Silver Creek every Sunday. It was a 15-mile journey each way, but he found himself looking forward to it with an anticipation that bordered on impatience. He and Clara fell into a pattern. He would arrive in the early afternoon, and they would have dinner together, then spend the evening talking or walking or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Sometimes he stayed overnight in the town's small boarding house and rode back Monday morning. Those Sunday visits became the highlight of his week, the thing he thought about while he worked on the barn and tended his stock. As September arrived and the aspens began turning gold on the mountainsides, the barn neared completion. Elias worked with renewed energy, driven by a vision that had expanded beyond the practical. He wanted the barn finished not just for himself, but for Clara. He wanted to show her what he had built, wanted to share that accomplishment with her. One Sunday in mid-September, as they sat on Clara's porch watching the stars emerge, she said, "Tell me about your family." Elias was quiet for a moment. "There is not much to tell. My parents died of fever when I was 20. I had no siblings, no other close family. I sold the farm and headed west. That must have been hard, being alone like that." "It was, but I learned to live with it." He glanced at her. "What about you? You mentioned an aunt and uncle, but what about your parents?" Clara's expression grew sad. "My mother died when I was 12. My father was a good man, but he did not know what to do with a daughter. He sent me to live with my aunt in Illinois, his sister. She and her husband raised me. My father died 4 years ago. I went back to Ohio for the funeral, but there was nothing left for me there. I'm sorry. Do not be. My aunt and uncle were good to me. Better than my father would have been, I think. He meant well, but he was not equipped for parenthood." Clara leaned her head against Elias's shoulder, and he felt his heart contract. "I think that is why teaching means so much to me. Those children need someone to believe in them, to tell them they matter. I can be that person." Elias wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. They sat like that for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, and he felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness, of home. In early October, with the first snow already dusting the highest peaks, Elias finished the barn. The last board was nailed, the last shingle secured, and the massive doors hung on their hinges. He stood back and looked at what he had created, feeling a satisfaction so profound it almost hurt. The barn rose 70 feet into the air, its roof peak sharp against the blue Montana sky. It was the tallest structure in 3 counties, maybe more. But more than that, it was sound. It would stand for 100 years or more, a testament to what one man could build with his own hands and enough determination. That Sunday, when Clara arrived for her weekly visit, she had started coming to him instead of waiting for him to come to her. Elias led her to the barn with barely suppressed excitement. "It is finished," he said simply. Clara walked slowly around the structure, taking in every detail. She ran her hands over the smooth wood, tested the massive doors, climbed the ladder to the upper level and looked out over the valley from the high window. Finally, she came back down and stood in front of him, her eyes shining. "Elias, this is magnificent. It is the most impressive thing I have ever seen." "It needs something, though," Elias said. He had been thinking about this for weeks. "The doors. They should be painted. Red, I think. Red stands out against the wood." Clara's face lit up. "Red doors would be beautiful, like a beacon. Will you help me paint them?" "I would love to." They spent the next Sunday painting the barn doors. Elias had ridden to Helena the week before and purchased paint and brushes, and now they worked side by side, spreading the deep red color across the wood. It was messy work, and they both ended up with paint on their hands and clothes. But Clara laughed more than Elias had ever heard her laugh, and he found himself laughing with her. When they finished, they stood back to admire their work. The red doors blazed against the pale wood of the barn, visible from miles away. It looked exactly right. "It is perfect," Clara said softly. Then, so quietly he almost did not hear her, she added, "It looks like home." Elias turned to look at her. "What did you say?" Clara met his eyes, and he saw vulnerability there, and hope, and something deeper. "I said it looks like home. This place, this barn. It feels like home to me." "Clara." He said her name like a prayer, like a promise. "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I love you." The words came out rough, unpolished, but true. "I have loved you since that first night when you came here, lost and tired, and you still had the courage to look me in the eye and speak your mind. I love your strength and your intelligence and the way you see the world. I love that you made me want something more than just solitude and work. I love you, and I want you to stay, not just for a visit. Stay here, with me." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Elias Thornton, are you asking me to marry you?" "I am. I know I am not much. I'm just a mountain man with dirt under his nails in a barn that's probably too big for any practical purpose. But I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy. I will build you anything you want. I will give you anything I have. Just say yes." "Yes," Clara whispered. "Yes, yes, yes." He kissed her then, pulling her into his arms with a desperation that surprised him. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his long hair, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, to the taste of her lips and the feel of her body pressed against his. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Clara laughed. "We are getting paint all over each other." "I do not care," Elias said, and kissed her again. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek. It was a simple ceremony attended by the townspeople Clara had befriended and the handful of neighbors Elias knew from the valley. Samuel Garrett stood up as his witness, still shaking his head in amazement that the solitary mountain man had found himself a bride. Clara wore a dress of pale blue silk that she had ordered from Helena, and Elias wore a new suit that felt stiff and uncomfortable, but was worth it to see the look in Clara's eyes when she saw him. After the ceremony, they rode back to the homestead together, Clara sitting beside Elias on the wagon seat. As they came around the bend and the barn came into view with its red doors gleaming in the afternoon sun, Clara squeezed his hand. "I meant what I said before," she told him. "This is home now, our home." "Our home," Elias agreed, "for as long as we both shall live." The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Clara gave up her teaching position in Silver Creek, though not without some regret. But she quickly found new ways to occupy herself on the homestead. She planted a garden near the cabin, started raising chickens, and began organizing the interior of the barn's upper level into proper living quarters. Elias had intended it as storage space, but Clara had different ideas. "We cannot live in that tiny cabin forever," she said one morning over breakfast, "especially not if we are going to have children someday. But the barn has all that space on the upper level. We could build proper rooms up there, a bedroom, a sitting room, maybe even a study where I could keep my books." Elias considered it. The idea had merit. The barn was warmer and more secure than the cabin, and the upper level had windows that looked out over the entire valley. "We would need to insulate it properly, install a stove, build interior walls." "Can we do it?" "We can do anything," Elias said, and was rewarded with one of Clara's brilliant smiles. They spent that winter transforming the barn's upper level into a home. Elias built walls and installed a large iron stove that would keep the space warm even in the depths of winter. Clara sewed curtains and ordered furniture from Helena, pieces that were nicer than anything Elias had ever owned. She arranged her books on shelves Elias built, hung pictures on the walls, and slowly transformed the raw space into something beautiful. By the time spring arrived in 1873, they had moved their belongings from the cabin into the barn. The space was larger and brighter than the cabin had been, with room to move and breathe. Standing in the main room, looking out the window at the valley below, Elias felt a contentment he had never known existed. "What do you think?" Clara asked, coming to stand beside him. She slipped her hand into his. "I think this is the finest home in Montana," Elias said honestly. "I think we are the luckiest people alive." That spring brought new challenges and new joys. Elias expanded his herd, buying cattle from ranches to the south and driving them north to his land. Clara planted an even larger garden and started corresponding with other women in the territory about forming a lending library. They worked side by side through the long summer days, and at night they retreated to their home in the barn, to the bed Elias had built with his own hands, and discovered the deeper intimacies of marriage. In August, Clara told him she was pregnant. Elias felt the news hit him like a physical blow, not of pain, but of overwhelming joy and terror mixed together. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am sure." Clara took his hands, placing them on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby, Elias, sometime in late February or early March." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she protested that he was crushing her. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Clara agreed, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Elias said. He pulled back to look at her face, drinking in the sight of her joy. "I love you so much, both of you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Clara remained active and healthy, though Elias worried constantly. He found himself trying to do all the heavy work, to shield her from anything that might be difficult or dangerous. Clara tolerated his protectiveness with good humor for the most part, though occasionally she had to remind him that she was pregnant, not made of glass. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she told him one evening when he objected to her carrying a basket of laundry. "I'm not going to break." "I know," Elias said, but he took the basket from her anyway. "Humor me." As Clara's belly grew and winter settled over the valley, Elias found himself spending more time in the barn than he had in months. He built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there were no rough edges, no splinters. He reinforced the walls and made sure the stove was working perfectly. He stocked the upper level with enough supplies to last through a blizzard just in case. Clara watched his preparations with amusement and affection. "You do realize that babies are quite small, do you not? We do not need an entire room just for a cradle." "We will need more space eventually," Elias said. "Children grow, and maybe we will have more than one." "Maybe we will," Clara agreed, smiling. She came to stand beside him, running her hand over the smooth wood of the cradle. "It is beautiful work, Elias. Our child will be lucky to have a father who cares so much." In late February, with snow piled high around the barn and the temperature well below freezing, Clara's labor began. Elias had ridden to Silver Creek 2 weeks earlier to ask the doctor to come stay at the homestead as Clara's time grew near. Dr. Samuel Brennan was an older man with steady hands and a calm demeanor, and he had agreed to wait at the homestead for a generous fee. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Elias paced the lower level of the barn, listening to Clara's cries and feeling utterly helpless. Samuel Garrett had come over to keep him company, and the two men sat by the stove, neither saying much. "She will be fine," Samuel said finally. "Dr. Brennan knows what he is doing." "I know," Elias said, but his hands were shaking. He had faced down bears and mountain lions without flinching, had survived winters that would have killed weaker men, but the thought of losing Clara terrified him in a way nothing else ever had. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, he heard a new sound, a baby crying. Elias was on his feet and up the ladder before he had conscious thought to move. Dr. Brennan met him at the top, holding a blanket-wrapped bundle. "You have a son," the doctor said, smiling, "a big, healthy boy, and your wife is tired but well." Elias took the baby with trembling hands, looking down at the tiny red face and the unfocused eyes. His son, his child. The emotion that washed over him was so powerful, it brought tears to his eyes. "Can I see Clara?" he asked. "Of course." Clara was propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale with exhaustion, but she was smiling. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Elias sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the baby. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I have never seen anything more beautiful in my life." "What should we name him?" Clara asked, reaching out to stroke the baby's soft hair. Elias thought for a moment. "My father's name was James. What do you think of that?" "James Thornton." Clara tested the name, then nodded. "I like it. James it is." That night, after Dr. Brennan had left and Samuel had gone home, Elias sat in the rocking chair he had built, holding his sleeping son. Clara was asleep in the bed, exhausted from her ordeal. Outside, the wind howled around the barn, but inside it was warm and safe. Elias looked around at the home they had built together, at the red doors visible through the window, at his sleeping wife and newborn son, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had come to Montana 5 years ago with nothing, seeking only solitude and a chance to prove himself. He had found so much more. He had found love and family and purpose. He had built the tallest barn in 3 counties, and Clara had painted its doors red and called it home. And now that home held everything that mattered in the world. The years that followed were full and rich. James grew from a baby into a toddler, and then a sturdy little boy who followed his father everywhere, asking endless questions and showing an early fascination with how things were built. In 1875, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah after Clara's mother. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they called Thomas. The homestead prospered. Elias's herd grew, and the tall barn proved its worth, providing shelter for livestock and storage for hay. Other ranchers began asking Elias's advice on barn construction, and he found himself with a second occupation during the winter months when ranch work slowed. He never built another barn as tall as his own, but he helped raise several that came close. Clara, for her part, found new ways to satisfy her love of teaching. She homeschooled their children and also opened their home to the children of neighboring families one afternoon a week, teaching reading and arithmetic. The red-doored barn became a landmark in the valley, a place where people knew they could find help or shelter, or simply a friendly welcome. In 1878, when James was 5 years old, a harsh winter storm blew in without warning one October afternoon. Elias was out checking on the cattle in the far pasture when he saw the wall of snow approaching from the north. He rode hard for home, knowing he had only minutes before the blizzard hit. He made it back just as the first heavy flakes began to fall. Clara was standing in the doorway of the barn, relief written across her face as she saw him approach. I was so worried," she said as he dismounted and led his horse inside. "Samuel Garrett stopped by an hour ago and said the storm looked bad." "It is bad," Elias confirmed, looking out at the rapidly deteriorating conditions. "We may be snowed in for days, but we have everything we need right here." And they did. The barn's thick walls kept out the wind and cold. The stove kept them warm. They had food in storage, and the animals were safe in their stalls on the lower level. For 3 days, the storm raged outside while the Thornton family remained safe and warm inside their unusual home. On the third day, when the storm finally broke and the sun came out, Elias dug his way out of the barn to find snow piled up past the lower windows. But the structure had held firm, not even creaking under the assault of the wind and snow. Elias stood in the deep snow, looking up at the tall barn with its red doors, and felt a surge of pride. He had built well, his family was safe, the children grew, and the homestead grew with them. Elias added onto the barn, building a separate structure for the animals so that the main barn could be dedicated entirely to family living space and storage. He built a proper kitchen on the lower level and expanded the upper level to include more bedrooms. The original cabin became a workshop where he stored his tools and worked on projects during the winter. Clara's lending library became a reality, with books circulating between homesteads throughout the valley. She taught the children to read and write and encouraged their curiosity about the world. She wrote letters to her friends back in Illinois, describing her life in Montana with affection and pride. She never regretted giving up teaching in Silver Creek. The barn, with its red doors and its warm interior, was exactly where she wanted to be. In 1880, when James was 7, Sarah 5, and Thomas 3, Elias came down with a fever. It started as a cough and quickly developed into pneumonia. For 2 weeks, Clara nursed him around the clock, dosing him with medicine from Dr. Brennan and keeping him warm. The children knew to be quiet, to play outside when the weather permitted, to help their mother with chores without complaint. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes not sure where he was or what year it was, but every time he opened his eyes, Clara was there, holding his hand, bathing his face with cool cloths, telling him to fight, to come back to her, that she needed him and the children needed him and he was not allowed to leave them. Slowly, painfully, he recovered. By the time spring arrived, he was back on his feet, though thinner than he had ever been and still prone to coughing fits. But he was alive, and he knew he owed that to Clara's fierce determination not to lose him. "You scared me," she told him one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the children play in the yard. "I thought I was going to lose you." "You will not lose me," Elias promised, pulling her close. "I am too stubborn to die, and I have too much to live for. I am not going anywhere." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "Good, because I intend to grow old with you, Elias Thornton, right here in this barn with the red doors that you built and I made into a home." "Then that is exactly what we will do," Elias said. And they did. The years passed and the children grew into young adults. James inherited his father's skill with his hands and his love of building things. He worked alongside Elias on the homestead and eventually began courting a girl from Silver Creek. Sarah was bright and curious like her mother, with a love of books and learning that led her to become a teacher herself. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, with a gift for working with animals that made him invaluable on the ranch. In 1885, James married his sweetheart, a girl named Elizabeth, and Elias built them a house on the far end of the homestead property. It was a smaller barn-style home, painted gray with red doors in honor of the original. James and Elizabeth started their own family, and soon Elias and Clara found themselves grandparents. The tall barn remained the heart of the homestead, its red doors visible from miles away. People traveling through the valley used it as a landmark, and more than one lost traveler found their way to those doors seeking shelter, just as Clara had so many years before. Elias and Clara never turned anyone away. They remembered what it was like to be alone and uncertain, and they opened their home to anyone who needed it. In 1890, Sarah married a young lawyer from Helena and moved to the city, though she visited often with her growing family. Thomas, who had never shown much interest in marriage, took over more of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Elias to slow down a bit as he approached his 50th birthday. One evening in the summer of that year, Elias and Clara sat together on the porch they had built onto the barn, watching the sun set over the mountains. They had been married for nearly 18 years, and Elias still felt the same surge of love when he looked at her that he had felt that first night when she arrived at his homestead, lost and tired and brave. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly, "giving up teaching in Silver Creek, living here instead of in town?" Clara looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? No, not for a moment. Why would you ask that? I just wonder sometimes if you would have been happier with a different life, a more conventional life. Clara took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Elias, I have never been happier than I am right here with you. This barn, this home that we built together, our children, our life here, this is everything I ever wanted. Even when I did not know I wanted it, you gave me a home in every sense of the word. How could I ever regret that? I love you, Elias said simply. I have loved you for 18 years, and I will love you until the day I die. And I love you, Clara replied, my mountain man who built the tallest barn in 3 counties and gave me a home with red doors. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, hands linked, hearts full. The barn rose behind them, solid and enduring, a testament to what 2 people could build when they worked together. The red doors gleamed in the fading light, a beacon of warmth and welcome. As autumn arrived and the aspens turned gold once more, Elias began thinking about the future. He was not a young man anymore. His hair was streaked with gray, and his joints ached on cold mornings. But he was still strong, still capable, and he had work left to do. He spent that fall and winter adding finishing touches to the barn and the homestead. He built a stone walkway from the barn to the well. He repaired the fence around Clara's garden and reinforced the outbuildings. He wanted everything perfect, everything secure. He wanted to know that if something happened to him, Clara and the children would be provided for. You are working too hard, Clara told him one December evening. You need to rest more. I will rest when everything is done, Elias said. Everything will never be done. There will always be something else to fix, something else to build. You taught me that. Clara came to stand in front of him, placing her hands on his chest. But you also taught me that home is not just about the buildings or the land. It is about the people. And I need you here, Elias, not exhausted, not running yourself into the ground trying to make everything perfect. Just here. He pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. You are right, as usual. I know, Clara said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. The winter of 1890 was mild, with less snow than usual, and temperatures that rarely dropped below 0. Elias and Clara spent many evenings sitting by the stove, reading or talking, or simply enjoying each other's company. James and Elizabeth visited often with their 2 children, and the barn filled with the sounds of family and laughter. In March of 1891, just as the snow was beginning to melt and the first signs of spring were appearing, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. At 41, she had not expected to have more children, and the news came as a shock to both of them. Are you all right with this? Elias asked her. We are not young anymore. I am more than all right with it, Clara assured him. Surprised, yes, but all right. More than all right, actually. I am happy. Then so am I, Elias said, and it was true. The thought of another child, another life to fill the barn with noise and love, pleased him enormously. The pregnancy was harder than Clara's previous ones had been. She was tired more often and prone to sickness that lasted well into her 5th month. Elias worried constantly, hovering over her until she finally snapped at him to stop treating her like an invalid. I am fine, she insisted. Women older than me have babies all the time. I just need rest and good food and less of you staring at me like I'm going to collapse at any moment. Elias tried to back off, but it was difficult. Clara was the center of his world, and the thought of anything happening to her terrified him. He found himself praying more than he had in years, asking God to keep her safe, to let her come through the birth healthy and whole. In October, as the leaves were turning and the first frosts were touching the valley, Clara went into labor. Dr. Brennan was there, as was Elizabeth, who had some experience with childbirth now, and was calm and capable. James took the other children to stay with Samuel Garrett, leaving the barn quiet except for the sounds of Clara's labor. This time, the birth was quicker. Just a few hours after the labor began, Clara delivered a healthy baby girl. Elias held his daughter, looking down at her perfect tiny features, and felt tears streaming down his face. Another daughter, Clara said softly from the bed. She looked exhausted, but happy. We are outnumbered now. I do not mind, Elias said. He brought the baby to Clara, laying her gently in his wife's arms. What should we call her? I was thinking about Rose, Clara said, For my aunt. She would have loved to see this. Rose Thornton, Elias said, testing the name. It is perfect. Rose was a calm baby, easier than any of the others had been. She rarely cried, and when she did, she was easily soothed. As winter set in and the family settled into new rhythms, the barn felt more like home than ever. The red doors stood out against the snow, a splash of color in the white landscape, and inside, the family gathered around the stove, telling stories and making plans for the spring. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Rose grew into a sweet, gentle child who loved animals and spent hours in the barn helping Thomas care for the horses and cattle. James and Elizabeth had 2 more children, expanding the family further. Sarah visited from Helena regularly, always with stories of city life and the legal cases her husband was working on. In 1895, Elias turned 55. He was still strong, still capable of a full day's work, but he had started training Thomas to take over more of the ranch operations. It was time, he felt, to step back a little, to let the next generation shoulder more of the responsibility. One evening that summer, as Elias and Clara sat together watching the sunset, Clara said, "Do you remember the first time I came here? How lost I was?" "I remember," Elias said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever met." "I was terrified," Clara admitted, "but you made me feel safe. From that very first night, you made me feel like I could trust you. You could trust me. You still can." "I know," Clara leaned against him, and Elias wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "This has been a good life, Elias, better than I ever imagined possible. I am grateful for every day of it." "So am I," Elias said, "every single day." As they sat together, watching the light fade from the sky, Elias thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had come to Montana seeking isolation and independence, determined to prove he could make it on his own. He had built the tallest barn in 3 counties as a monument to his own stubborn pride. But Clara had seen something else in that barn. She had seen a home, and in seeing it, she had made it real. The barn with the red doors stood as tall and solid as ever, a landmark in the valley and a shelter for the family that lived within its walls. It had weathered storms and seasons, had housed births and deaths and everything in between. It was more than just a building. It was a promise kept, a dream realized, a testament to love and determination and the power of 2 people working together toward a common goal. In 1898, James took over full operation of the ranch, with Thomas working alongside him. Elias officially retired, though he still kept busy with small projects around the homestead. He built furniture for his grandchildren, repaired anything that broke, and spent long hours simply sitting with Clara, talking about their life and their memories. "We built something lasting," Clara said to him one day as they stood together looking at the barn. "Not just the building, but the family, the home. That will outlast both of us." "It will," Elias agreed, "and that's enough, more than enough." Rose, now 7 years old, came running up to them, her face flushed with excitement. "Papa, can you help me build a treehouse? James said you built the best things." Elias laughed and took his daughter's hand. "I can help you build a treehouse. Come on, let us go look at the trees and see which one would work best." As they walked away together, Clara watched them go with a smile on her face. Her mountain man, still building, still creating, still finding joy in the work of his hands. And their daughter, eager and curious, learning from him just as their other children had. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Springs brought new calves and green grass and the endless work of planting. Summers were hot and busy, filled with haying and fence mending and the constant needs of the ranch. Autumns brought the harvest and the preparation for winter. And winters, cold and snowy, were times for the family to draw together in the warmth of the barn, sharing stories and making memories. In 1900, as the new century began, the Thornton family gathered in the barn for a celebration. All 3 of the older children were there with their families. James and Elizabeth now had 5 children. Sarah and her husband had 3. Even Thomas, who had finally married a quiet woman named Mary, had a baby on the way. The barn was filled with noise and laughter and life. Elias stood on the porch, looking out over the assembled family, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was his legacy, not just the barn or the land, but these people. these lives that had sprung from the love he and Clara had built together. Clara came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how lucky I am," Elias said, "about how a lonely mountain man built a barn and a woman painted its doors red and called it home, and from that simple beginning, all of this grew." "It is pretty remarkable, is it not?" Clara agreed, "though I think it was less about the barn and more about the two people who met because of it." "You are probably right," Elias said. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I love you, Clara Thornton. I have loved you for more than 27 years, and that love has only grown deeper with time. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Clara said softly. "My mountain man, my home builder, my love." They kissed, there on the porch of the barn they had made into a home, while their children and grandchildren celebrated inside. The red doors stood open behind them, welcoming, warm, eternal. The years that followed were quieter but no less rich. Elias and Clara settled into the rhythms of old age, content to let their children run the ranch while they enjoyed their grandchildren and each other. They took long walks through the valley, held hands by the fire, and treasured every moment they had together. In 1905, when Elias was 65 and Clara 61, they celebrated 33 years of marriage with a party that brought people from all over the territory. The barn was decorated with ribbons and flowers, and a feast was laid out on tables set up in the yard. Friends and neighbors came to pay their respects to the couple who had built not just the tallest barn in 3 counties, but a legacy of love and family that would endure for generations. Samuel Garrett, now an old man himself, raised a glass in toast. To Elias and Clara Thornton, who proved that sometimes the best things in life are built by hand, nurtured with love, and shared with open hearts. May the barn with the red doors stand for another 100 years, and may the love that built it never fade. "Here, here," the crowd shouted, and Elias felt Clara squeeze his hand. "We did well," she whispered to him. "Did not we?" "We did better than well," Elias replied. "We did perfectly." As the party continued late into the night, Elias and Clara slipped away for a few moments of quiet. They climbed to the upper level of the barn and stood at the window, looking out over the valley that had been their home for so many years. "Do you remember that first night?" Elias asked. "When you came here lost and scared?" "I remember," Clara said. "I remember thinking you were either going to be my salvation or my doom, and I was too tired to care which." Elias laughed. "And which did I turn out to be?" "My salvation," Clara said without hesitation. "My salvation, my home, my love. Everything good in my life came from that night, from the choice to trust you. And everything good in my life came from the choice to open my door to a stranger," Elias said. "We were lucky, you and I. Lucky to find each other in this vast territory. Lucky to recognize what we had. Lucky to hold on to it." "It was not just luck," Clara said. "It was work. It was choosing each other every day, even when things were hard. It was building something together and refusing to let it fall apart." "You are right." Elias agreed. "Though I still think there was some luck involved. What are the chances that you would get lost and end up at my homestead? What are the chances that I would be there that day instead of out hunting or checking traps?" "I like to think it was fate," Clara said, "that we were meant to find each other, that this barn, this home, this life we built together was always waiting for us. We just had to be brave enough to reach for it." Elias pulled her close, holding her the way he had held her 1,000 times before. "I am glad we were brave enough." They stood together in the quiet of the barn, listening to the sounds of celebration below, and felt the peace that comes from a life well lived and love well given. The winter of 1907 was harsh, with storms that rolled through the valley one after another. Elias, now 67, felt the cold more than he used to, and he spent more time by the fire than he liked to admit. But he was still sharp, still engaged with the world around him, and he took pleasure in teaching his grandchildren the skills he had learned over a lifetime. Rose, now 16, was particularly interested in learning about construction and building. She followed Elias around, asking questions about measurements and joinery and how to read the grain of wood. Elias was delighted by her interest and spent hours teaching her everything he knew. Why do you think it is important to build things? Rose asked him one afternoon as they worked together on repairing a fence. Elias considered the question carefully. Because when you build something with your own hands, you are leaving a mark on the world. You are saying, I was here and I made something that matters. This fence might not seem important, but it will keep the cattle safe. That barn over there with the red doors has kept our family safe for more than 30 years. Building things is how we take care of the people we love. I want to learn to build things, Rose said. Real things like you did. Important things. Then I will teach you, Elias promised. Everything I know, I will teach you. And he did. Over the following year, as his health began to slowly decline, Elias passed on his knowledge to Rose and to his other grandchildren who were interested. He taught them about selecting timber, about proper joinery, about the importance of a level foundation and square corners. He taught them that building was not just about the physical structure, but about the pride of doing something well and the satisfaction of creating something that would last. In the spring of 1908, Elias became ill again. This time it was not pneumonia, but something slower and more insidious. He grew weak and tired easily, and Dr. Brennan, making one of his last house calls before retirement, told Clara privately that Elias's heart was failing. How long? Clara asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Months, maybe, the doctor said gently. Maybe less. I'm sorry, Clara. There's nothing I can do. Clara nodded, thanked him, and sent him on his way. Then she went to Elias, who was resting in their bed, and climbed in beside him. The doctor told you, Elias said. It was not a question. He told me, Clara confirmed. She took his hand, feeling how thin it had become, how frail. I'm not ready to lose you. I know. I'm not ready to go. Elias turned his head to look at her, and his eyes were as clear and direct as they had been the day they met. But I'm not afraid, Clara. I have had a good life, a great life. I have loved you and been loved by you. I have built things that will outlast me. I have children and grandchildren who will carry on. What more could any man ask for? I could ask for more time, Clara said, and her voice broke on the words. I would give it to you if I could, Elias said gently, but I cannot. So instead, I will tell you this. You made my life worth living. Every day with you was a gift. Every moment in this barn, in this home we built together, was precious. I have no regrets, Clara, none at all. They lay together in the quiet of the barn, holding hands, listening to the sounds of the family moving around below. And Clara felt her heart breaking even as she tried to be strong. Elias lingered through the spring and into early summer. He grew weaker, spending most of his time in bed, but his mind remained sharp. The family gathered often, and the barn was filled with the voices of children and grandchildren coming to say goodbye. Elias greeted each one with love and encouragement, offering advice and blessings and telling them how proud he was of the people they had become. On a warm evening in late June, as the sun was setting over the mountains, Elias asked Clara to help him to the window. She supported him as he stood, looking out over the valley he had called home for more than 30 years. It is beautiful, he said softly. I am glad I got to see it one more time. It will always be beautiful, Clara said, tears streaming down her face, and you made it more beautiful by being here. Elias turned to look at her, raising one trembling hand to touch her face. I love you, Clara. With everything I am, I love you. I love you too, Clara whispered, always and forever. He kissed her one last time, gentle and sweet, and then let her help him back to bed. He fell asleep with his hand in hers, and sometime in the night, with Clara beside him and the barn standing solid around them, Elias Thornton quietly passed away. The funeral was held 3 days later, and it seemed like everyone in 3 counties came to pay their respects. They buried Elias on a hill overlooking the valley, with a view of the barn with the red doors. The headstone was simple, just his name and the dates of his birth and death. But Clara knew that his real monument was the barn itself, standing tall and proud, a testament to what one man could build with determination and love. In the weeks and months that followed, Clara mourned deeply. The barn felt empty without Elias, even though it was still filled with family. She missed him with an ache that never quite went away, missed his presence and his voice and the solid comfort of his love. But she did not break. Elias had taught her to be strong, had shown her how to face hardship with courage and grace. So she carried on, taking care of her family, tending her garden, and keeping the barn that Elias had built and she had made into a home running smoothly. Rose, now 17, stayed close to her grandmother during those difficult months. She helped with chores, kept Clara company in the evenings, and slowly, carefully, began to ask questions about building and construction again. "Do you think Grandpa would mind if I finished some of his projects?" Rose asked one evening. Clara smiled through her tears. "I think he would be delighted. He always hoped his grandchildren would carry on his work." So Rose began to build. She completed the treehouse Elias had started for one of the younger grandchildren. She repaired the workshop door that had been sticking. She built a new chicken coop using the designs Elias had drawn up but never finished. And with each project, she felt closer to the grandfather she had loved, felt his presence guiding her hands and his voice in her head, teaching her how to do things right. The years passed, and Clara remained in the barn with the red doors. James and Thomas ran the ranch efficiently, and the Thornton family continued to grow and prosper. Sarah visited regularly from Helena, and the barn was often filled with the noise and chaos of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. On Clara's 70th birthday in 1914, the family threw a celebration in her honor. The barn was decorated much as it had been for her anniversary party years before, and people came from all over to wish her well. Clara stood on the porch, looking out at the assembled crowd, and felt Elias's presence so strongly it almost took her breath away. "I wish you could see this," she whispered to the wind. "Look what we built, my love. Look what we created." She lived another 8 years, remaining active and engaged despite her advancing age. She taught her great-grandchildren to read, helped in the garden, and spent long hours telling stories about Elias and the early days of the homestead. She never remarried, never even considered it. Elias had been the love of her life, and she was content with the memories they had made together. In the spring of 1922, Clara became ill with influenza. At 82, her body could not fight the infection, and she grew weaker by the day. The family gathered at the barn, filling it once more with love and life, and Clara looked around at them with satisfaction. "I am ready," she told Rose, who sat beside her bed holding her hand. "I've had a long, good life, and I am ready to see your grandfather again." "We are going to miss you so much," Rose said, tears streaming down her face. "And I will miss all of you," Clara said, "but the barn will still be here. This home that your grandfather built and I made ours will still be here. It will shelter you and your children and your children's children. Promise me you will take care of it." "I promise," Rose said. "I will take care of it. We all will." Clara smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. She passed away peacefully that night, surrounded by family, in the barn that had been her home for 50 years. They buried her next to Elias on the hill, and the family gathered afterward in the barn to share memories and comfort each other. The red doors stood open, welcoming, and the barn itself seemed to embrace them all, offering shelter and security just as it had for half a century. Rose, now 31 and married with children of her own, stood at the window looking out at the valley. She thought about her grandparents, about the love story that had begun with a lost traveler and a mountain man, about the barn that had become the center of so many lives. "I will keep my promise, Grandma," she said softly. "I will take care of it." And she did. Rose became the keeper of the barn, maintaining it with the same care and attention that Elias had given it. She taught her own children the skills Elias had taught her, and they in turn taught their children. The barn with the red doors became more than just a structure. It became a symbol of family and endurance, of love and legacy, of two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both. Decades passed and the barn continued to stand. The red doors were repainted every few years, always the same deep, vibrant red that Clara had chosen so long ago. The structure weathered storms and seasons, remaining solid and sound, a testament to the quality of Elias's craftsmanship. The story of the mountain man who built the tallest barn in 3 counties and the woman who painted its doors red and called it home became a legend in the valley. People would point to the barn from miles away and tell their children about Elias and Clara Thornton, about the love that had built something lasting, about the power of two people working together toward a common dream. And if sometimes On quiet evenings, when the sun was setting over the mountains, it seemed like two figures could be seen standing on the porch of the barn, holding hands and looking out over the valley they had loved well. The family never questioned it. Some loves are too strong to be contained by death. Some homes hold more than just memories. They hold spirits and dreams and the eternal echo of love given freely and returned 1,000-fold. The barn with the red doors stood tall and proud, sheltering generations of the Thornton family. A monument not to one man's pride, but to what two people could create when they chose to build a life together. The tallest barn in 3 counties, with its red doors gleaming in the Montana sun, a beacon of home and love and everything that truly matters in this world. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all, not just the structure itself, but the love and family and belonging that it represented, the home that Elias built and Clara made theirs, standing solid and enduring through all the years, a testament to a love story that would never be forgotten.